This is the second worksheet in a series in your packet, and this worksheet gives you some rules about overlap, texture, and how to deal with curved surface. And I just have a couple flowers here as just an example. It could be applied to almost any object. But one of the things I want to point out is as you add value to make an object look like it has overlap, created shadows. So if I have my hands like this, well, it's probably better to do it this way. If I have my hands like this, do you see that this hand is on top? It's overlapping my other hand. And there is a place where in that overlap where this hand is covering that hand, I'm getting a shadow cast. It's pretty strong because the light from the window is coming in pretty strong, but if I do it this way, you can still see that at the intersection right here where my hand is overlapping the other hand, it creates a bit of a shadow. If I do that on my worksheet, you can still you can see this shadow that's cast, and it's pretty strong from the lighting. If I turn it this way, you can still see it's a little darker here at the edge as it's sitting on top of it. If I cross my fingers like this finger's casting a shadow here. If I do it here, this finger's casting a shadow here. So as the object is on top, it's closer to you, it's going to look lighter. It's probably going to cast a shadow to the object that's below it. Okay, so let's apply this to this worksheet. There's petals in this flower. This petal probably is continuing underneath here in this location. So petal A overlaps petal B. So I'm going to put a little bit of value where I see that overlap. This petal cuts off, would probably go behind here, so it's overlapping a little bit there. This petal probably has a little more material there, so this one overlaps this one. This one is being overlapped on this side by this one. They're not all in order. This one is overlapped. This is tucking behind both of those, so it's got an overlap here and an overlap all the way up here. This one is overlapped here and overlapped here. This one is overlapped here and it overlaps here. All of them have a little bit, except for there's these couple that, this one's overlapped here too. Okay. There's a couple of them that are absolutely on top of everything else. Right now I've got kind of a stripe. I don't want to leave that. I just want to point out a couple things to you first. And then the center overlaps all of them a little bit. So I'm going to put a little bit of value in the middle of all of them. And that gets us a place to start. I don't want it to look like it has a stripe on it because that's probably not a place where the petal comes and folds to a new direction. So we need to kind of gradually take that out and just let it fade out to a lighter object, because just like my hand has a shadow here and it gradually gets a little bit lighter, we're going to do the same thing as if that flower happens. So I'm going to take all of these values out just a little subtler. I don't want it to look like it has a stripe around it. But I've now added a little bit of value to all the places where there's an overlap. And then I have to take those values out a little bit. I don't need to color the whole flower. Here's my sample. And then you can see I have dark values where it's touching the center, and I have the overlap has a little bit more value than where it's this object is on top of here. So this is a highlight. It's closer to you. It's going to pick up more light. This one's going to cast a shadow on it. And I continue around, and you can see that that happens on each of these. The thing to avoid is you do not want a really strong little value change and then have it stop. If you go really dark, just make the whole flower a little bit darker. But watch for not leaving these stripes. One more thing, as you're going to do all three of these flowers in just a minute, this flower, not only does the center overlap the flowers and the petals overlap the other petals, but this flower overlaps this flower. So in my sample, there's a little bit of shadow so that this petal looks like it comes forward, casts a little bit of shadow behind it. You'll notice that each of the centers have a little bit of dark, and everywhere that it's overlapped, you're going to see a little bit of value applied. And then I just gradually take it out so it doesn't look like a flat surface. It looks like something that's got a little bit of a gradual curve to it. Each of these intersections where the other petal, the other flower overlaps the second flower, is also filled in. Go ahead, leave this on pause, and try this particular part of the second worksheet. I'm going to do part 2 of this worksheet now. I want you to add value to create texture and overlap. So let's deal with the overlap first. All right, this flower overlaps this one, so I'm going to put a little bit of shading here and pull it out. And then this flower overlaps this one. I'm going to put a little bit of shading here and pull it out. And then these don't touch a lot, but I think this petal looks like it's on top here. Well, let's do the centers. The centers are going to have a little bit of value because they tuck in. That center is going to pop out of each of them, so I would do that to all three of these flowers. And then this one looks like it little bit overlaps. This dogwood petal overlaps that one just a tiny bit. That one does. This one, no overlap there. Over here, this one overlaps a little bit. So apply that overlap rule where you don't see the whole object because it's covering part of it up. And then apply that value change. And then work your way through that. And then I want you to add texture. Now a dogwood flower has a petal that has a little bit of kind of curly pieces in here, and that's why I've drawn those lines to just indicate that there's kind of a ruffling in there as it's gathered into the middle. So what I want you to do is we're going to imply that we have some kind of ridges in that petal as it moves in. And we want it to be irregular and natural, so it's going to be important that we have different lengths of them. They should probably flow with the curve of the petal. So this one would have that curve, this one might be a little straighter, so that it flows with the petal. It's going to tuck into the middle a little bit more and make the edges kind of irregular and natural, but they should kind of work with the flow of the shape of the petal. And we're going to add a little bit of texture as if there's some three-dimensionality within that petal. Here's my sample. One of the things, if you know what dogwoods look like, this little piece here is kind of a dark burgundy. You might want to fill that little piece in. Makes it look a little more real. That's just an observed value change. It has nothing to do with the location of the piece. So here's my sample. You can see that I've darkened in those little points, and then I have darker areas at the centers of each of them. I have darker areas at the overlaps. Here's an overlap between flowers, so I did that one also. And then I've taken a little bit of that center and taken it out to an irregular edge. So the ends do not match. They're kind of grayer towards the middle, and they kind of finger out into smaller lines. They're different lengths. They look natural. Avoid doing something like this where it looks like spikes that are straight. They need to follow the curve of the flower. You know, the middle can be straight. This side should curve with the edge. This side should curve with the edge. Don't make them all the same length. Don't make them just big, strong lines. That's not what we want it to do. We want it to kind of look like this sample where it's very subtle changes. Put the computer on pause and add value to your piece, considering both texture and overlap. Overlap, overlap, and then put in the texture that dogwood, and you're welcome to add, if you'd like, the value changes that are based on color. Third part of this worksheet, I'm asking you to create value using texture, overlap, and a curved surface. These are little drawings of tulips, and tulips are kind of a curved, cylindrical kind of form. And so I want you to apply all three of these rules, but then we're also going to make it look like it comes in a cylinder. Now the stems of a tulip are going to be a cylinder, so think of them as something that has to have a dark edge on both sides, and that it's going to roll forward, and it's going to have a lighter area but not a stripe on it. So I'm going to put a dark value on the outside edge of all my stems, and then it's going to roll to a lighter color in the middle without necessarily a stripe. And what I want you to avoid is having a stripe on it. It should not look like a dark edge and a dark edge and then a light middle. Don't start this way. Keep it a little bit subtler. As you can see, I have a dark edge and it rolls slowly to a middle, so it feels like those are cylinders even though they're not a geometric form. On the tulips themselves, I want you to consider texture, overlap, and a curved surface. So this tulip is basically a cylinder. It's darker on this side, and it's darker on this side because it's a curved surface. It's kind of like that apple we looked at earlier. It's curved back here too because it's curving away from you. It's this way as well as this way. And it's a curved surface, so we want it to be subtle. We don't want it to have an abrupt color change. It's not got a fold in it. It doesn't have a change of angle there. It's very slow transition. So I'm going to pull these in. It's my cat. Hi, Maddie. Yes. Alright, and then this petal overlaps this one, so I do want to apply that overlap rule here and just really lightly let it pull forward. And then these two petals overlap this one, so here we have an intersection. We're going to have a little bit of shadow and a little bit of shadow. We don't want it to look like an outline, so I'm going to pull it out a little bit. And we can pull this cylinder in. Now, with the tulip, a lot of times these flowers have a little bit of grain to them. So as you're making your value changes, I would make sure that you're adding value kind of in this curvature line. And if you've picked a tulip to draw, you may want to put some linear work into it because sometimes they have streaks in them. It's part of their veining. But don't put them straight up or certainly not across. Let them go with the grain of the petal because this texture would be up and around, up and around, up and around, up and around. It wouldn't go straight. It certainly wouldn't go across. My sample is here. You can see it's darker on the edge, on the sides because it's basically a cylinder. My overlaps are contained. I've got value changes and a little bit of texture on all three of these. I'm going to leave this up as a sample. Before we do, I want to review, be sure you're not leaving a really strong edge, that your textures aren't really bold, they should be subtle, and they need to not, don't make them go across this way, they need to go up and with the values, but they need to be subtle like these are. So leave this on pause.